Whoever is listening, guys, welcome back. My name is Grayson Mann, and welcome to episode 130, or part 4 of our Clemson football preview series. We've done Duke, we've done Florida State, and we just did Wake Forest, which dropped on Wednesday, so you should go check that out. And today, we have Steve, who works for thejuicerivals.com, and he's covering Syracuse for us for part 4. Steve, how you doing, man? Welcome to the podcast.
Doing well, Grayson. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I know it's July, but there's no bad time to talk college football.
Absolutely. And it's getting closer and closer. This series is designed to keep their appetite steady until we reach August 1st, which is Clemson's first practice. Getting excited for it. So can you just walk our audience through what your role is in this with the Syracuse rivals and just what you do in general?
I really kind of dabble mostly in recruiting. I've been writing, with them. We've only been with Rivals for about 5 months now. The site was kind of dormant for probably a year. We discovered that in February, had the opportunity to take it over, move our site there. We were the Juice Online for a long time, independent site, built up a following. Between Rivals and with the Juice Online, I've been writing for the site 10 years. So in really the last, I want to say like 3 or 4 years, I've really kind of focused on recruiting, because we've discovered, people, fans especially, they just love recruiting. And it's, I'm sure the coaches will tell you, recruiting is year round. It does not end, even when the season ends. And that's how fans are. Everyone wants to know, who's going to your school, what's their star ranking. So I really kind of focus on recruiting. I spend a decent amount of time looking on Twitter. It seems every player out there has an account, and, they all like to tweet out, what offers they get, when they're taking an unofficial visit, when they're taking an official visit, when they're going to, like all the special camps coaches run. So I find a lot of those and I forward those to kind of the gentleman who runs our site, Charles Kang, and that really helps him. So he winds up, contacting all these recruits, and we really just kind of started to hammer, getting interviews with all these kids, and that's really kind of been our bread and butter since we came to Rivals.
Yeah, especially in the day of social media, I feel like the appetite for recruiting, especially where it feels like it's very immersive, at least to me. It's you're following them along on their journey as they're posting it on Twitter, as you say, of their top fives, their top threes, when they're going to commit. You can live stream some of these. Yeah. It's almost like a big event, like you're watching a movie for certain programs, because some of these guys are going to be program changing. So it's really special, this specific area of football. So for you, how has recruiting carried over into what I would say is the spring? And what we like to do with this series, I want to get your impression of how Syracuse, or maybe what you've been hearing about how Syracuse has looked in the spring as they look forward to 2023.
Well, spring ball was really interesting for them. As everyone's aware, the transfer portal has kind of really changed the game here. So spring, a few different aspects. They had a lot of coaching turnover, probably half their staff left, including the gentleman who is considered their ace recruiter. He's a guy named Nick Monroe. He's originally from Minnesota. And ironically, they played Minnesota in the bowl game, and Nick got a chance to join the Minnesota coaching staff. And no Syracuse fan wanted to see him go, because if there was, he kind of pursued all like the biggest names they went after. His nickname was the Swag Daddy, and he's a fun guy to follow on Twitter. So it was really kind of a big blow to them when he went, he wanted to go home, and you can't blame a guy for that. But you got to give Baber's credit. He really revamped the staff, and he brought in some really good recruiters. Namely, a guy named Nunzo Campanile, he's from New Jersey, kind of like one of the preeminent football families down there. His brother, Nunzio, used to be on the Rutgers staff. I think his brother might have been on the Rutgers staff at one point. His brother's, I believe, an NFL coach now. His dad was a long-time high school football coach there. In the past few years, Syracuse has made an effort to really get back into New Jersey, where, a couple of decades ago, they used to own the state. And then, once Paul Pasqualoni was relieved of his duties, they kind of had a big fall off and kind of lost their way in New Jersey. So they've really made some inroads in there. And then when you look at the players they lost from last year's team, so kind of the big four losses they had were their left tackle, Matthew Bergeron. He was drafted in the second round. Their top cornerback, Garrett Williams. I think he was drafted in the third round. And then their best linebacker, Mikel Jones, and Sean Tucker, who, everyone knows who Sean Tucker is. Apparently he went undrafted, which was surprising at the time, but it turns out he had some medical issue, and I think that's why teams stayed away from him. But I know Mikel and Sean both signed undrafted contracts. So those four guys are trying to find their way in the NFL now, and so they had to replace those guys. And then you get back to the transfer portal. Syracuse runs a 3-3-5 defense, and their calling card the past couple of years has really been the secondary. Well, two of their best remaining guys, Deuce Chestnut and Jihad Carter, they both sought greener pastures through the portal. Deuce transferred to LSU, and Jihad transferred to Ohio State. So those are two massive blows right there. And then going into the spring, once the season was over, Garrett Schrader had off-season surgery. I think it was on his throwing arm. So he didn't, he was completely out of the spring. So that left most of the quarterback snaps to the two backups, Carlos Del Rio Wilson and Justin Lamson. So when you combine all that, together, they had a really interesting spring. And they came out of it, it really gave those two guys, there's no secret, that Schrader is going to be the guy, going into his senior season. But both Del Rio Wilson and Lamson each kind of showed flashes. At one point, Lamson suffered a season ender, I believe, last summer and missed this past year. So once the spring was over, he wound up transferring. So he hopped in the portal, and he's at Stanford now. But then Babers struck back with the portal, and they got a kid named Braden Davis out of South Carolina. So Syracuse's quarterback room now is three guys who they all got through the transfer, and they all came from SEC programs. So they're, I don't want to say they're stacked at quarterback, but they're in a much better position than they were a few years ago. So it's been an interesting spring to see how they're gonna fill the voids of those important players. How kind of the guys who are backups in the secondary, how they're going to fill the roles left behind by Chestnut and Carter, and who's going to wind up being the backup to Schrader. Schrader runs a lot. He's a big guy, and when you try to tackle him, you're gonna feel it too. But he's susceptible to injury, so they need a viable backup in that role too. So it's a very, very interesting spring to March.
A lot of turnover for sure. And I think when you look at what the college football landscape looks like, I think Syracuse, the way you kind of described it, it sums it up perfectly. There's a lot of change. There's a lot of turnover. So how these teams respond to that is going to be very telling. But for a second, let's rewind to 2022, because when Clemson's square in the middle in this schedule, and you start 6-0, and then you finish 7-6 and go to a bowl game, but it feels like two different seasons, especially when you have a very wacky, some would say controversial Clemson game. What, in your mind, as you're watching that team, what went wrong there? Was there injuries that people weren't talking about? Was it just that the schedule got significantly more difficult? Walk us through what that was like for Babers.
Yeah, sure. It's, like you said, it really was kind of like two separate seasons. Going into last year, Dino was under a lot of pressure. Got to make a bowl game. And the first 6 games, they went 6-0, and a couple of the coaches, after they won the 6th game, they were tweeting, one of them tweeted, something to the effects of, bowl eligible, something along those lines. So they're undefeated. They've got a bowl game, no matter what happens, and then really two things kind of sent them on the way of a 5-game losing streak. The schedule got significantly harder, and so their first 6 games were Louisville, at UConn, at home versus Purdue, which was a fantastic game. They won that in the last 7 seconds. At home versus Virginia, a throwaway game versus FCS Wagner, and then a good game against a good NC State team. So then the schedule, they went to Clemson, which was a grind. They came home to play Notre Dame, and Garrett Schrader got hurt in that game. He missed the second half. And then they went to Pittsburgh, which Pittsburgh has given them fits for about 15 years now. Lost there, came home. They got waxed by Florida State, which, it seems like Florida State is, are they back, to be in Florida State? If they're not back, they're just about there, and I think this season will tell us a lot. And then they traveled to Wake Forest, where they lost a 45-35 shootout. A lot of teams lost, shootouts to Wake Forest with Sam Hartman, but, I kind of did a little math today earlier on those 5 losses. Their opponents finished the season a combined 47-19. So that's, over 9, an average of over 9 wins a game on those 5 teams that beat them. Now, like I said, Schrader missed the second half of the Notre Dame game, and he missed all of the Pittsburgh game because of the injury, and the offense really slowed down in the Pittsburgh game. I mean, they lost 19-9. They got, 3 field goals. And then the last game of the regular season, they rebounded. They won at Boston College. And that to close out at 7-5 and lost the bowl game to Minnesota. So now kind of the other compounding factor in this is they suffered a handful of season-ending injuries. As I mentioned, their defense is a 3-3-5. So going into last season, their 3 starting defensive linemen, they all graduated. So they were really young on the defensive line. And they suffered a few injuries there, including to Terry Lockett, who was their kind of biggest, strongest, most experienced guy. And he was a real run stopper. So they became really susceptible to teams that could run the ball. Clemson and Shipley, Notre Dame ran all over them. Pittsburgh has been a running team for years. Florida State, their quarterback, he can really run. So that was, when you combine the injuries with just a significant upgrade in quality of opponent, that's really kind of, how they wound up where they finished.
Yeah, and it felt like going into that Syracuse game, especially going into Death Valley, given all the circumstances, they gave Clemson their best shot. And it came down to a final drive. KJ Henry sacks Garrett Schrader, and that's about what did it. And it felt like, hey, this team's not too far off from being really one of the more improved teams within this conference, and they just start to fall apart, like you mentioned. So how does Syracuse look at this from the job security of Dino Baber? Because as you said, the pressure was on for him last year to make a bowl game. What does he have to do necessarily to say that he's worthy of at least another year or maybe an extension with Syracuse's program?
Well, now one thing with being a private school, they're not obligated to, release their financials. So it's kind of somewhat of a big secret as to, what Babers makes and, how many years he has left on his contract. I believe he got an extension a couple of years ago. I think the extension was rumored supposed to be for like 4 years or there's, somewhere along those lines. So, and, they don't have, the finances that a lot of other schools have. So it's not like they can just kind of, cut bait with a coach if after 3 years things aren't going well, they just can't, go back to the well and start over. So and that's kind of reflective in how they recruit too. They really have to develop in terms of their players, and coaches might get a little longer leash, at a school like Syracuse just because of the financials. So it seems like Baber's job security is, always a preseason topic of conversation. I'm sure he's tired of hearing about it, and it does, kind of get a little boring, talking about it because it seems like the same old thing every year. Last year certainly helped. I think it took a lot of, pressure off him, finished with a winning season, got to a bowl game. I mean, certainly no one liked the 5-game losing streak. It seemed like they did have Clemson on the ropes there. They had an 11-point lead on the road at Death Valley. Not a lot of teams do that. That was certainly a disheartening win or loss there. A couple other of those games, a couple plays here and there, especially against Wake Forest. They could have had that one. I kind of think the bottom would have to fall out this year for, in by I mean like, 4-8, something like that, for the administration to decide, that they're going to make a change. Just kind of looking at the schedule with what they have, I really just kind of don't see that happening. Out of conference, they've got Colgate, Western Michigan, a return game against Purdue. That is at Purdue. That'll be interesting. But Purdue's got a new coach, new starting quarterback, and then they host Army. But then the schedule, once they get into the ACC games, this is how their first 4 ACC games start. They host Clemson. A week later, they go to North Carolina, Drake May. And a week after that, they go to Florida State, it's now this year is kind of like, well, is Florida State, are they going to step right up? And is it going to be them versus Clemson for, ACC supremacy? So then after those 3 games, then they get a bye week, and then they go to Virginia Tech, which is,
never easy.
Yeah. That's difficult venue to play. They're certainly not what they were, in the Michael Vick years, but it's a difficult, that's no easy road trip. And that's their first 4 games. So I mean, are they looking at starting the ACC, 1-3? I don't know. I mean, that's, then they close 3 of their 4 games are at home. They close home versus BC. Home versus Pitt. That game's actually going to be in Yankee Stadium, which
nice. That's cool.
It has some charm to it. No Syracuse fan is happy about that because it was just the game they play Pitt every year. They're like one of the crossovers. In this game is the home Syracuse game, so the game is supposed to be in the Dome, which is a lot more difficult to play. And honestly, who wants to play in a baseball stadium? So fans aren't too happy that one of their home games is in the Bronx there. They visit Georgia Tech, and then they close the season home against Wake Forest. But between the out of conference schedule and kind of the back end of the schedule, there really should be 6 to 7 wins in there, to at least get bowl eligibility, potentially finish with another winning record and kind of keep the momentum that they built last year. Recruiting is actually going really well for them. They in the month of June they scored 12 commits. They had 4 going in there. They're with 16 recruits right now, and if you look at the rivals rankings, and granted rankings are subjective, and a lot of teams don't have their full allotment yet, but last I checked they were somewhere around like 35 or 36 in the overall rankings, which is significantly much higher than they finish. So they're targeting their guys, they're getting their guys. They've got 6 kids out of New Jersey. That's the most of any school in the country so far. They've got a quarterback commit, Jakari Williams, who was previously committed to Georgia Tech. He decommitted. He's 3-star on Rivals. I think he's 4-star on a couple other sites. So the recruiting's going quite well for them. So they have a lot of positives going in their direction. How will that translate into the season? That's why they play the game. So we'll find out.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting with everything that you laid it out. And this is one of the big pictures that this series offers throughout this 10-part episode. The interview series is a big picture on how do we define success for certain programs, and stuff like you mentioned, how this program may not have as much funding as a Florida State or a Clemson. And we are talking about this with Connor with Wake Forest is that, hey, this is a program that isn't, yeah, they would love to win the ACC, but if they go 8-5 or they finish that in that territory, it's a great season. So with everything that you've laid out, with the circumstances that face Syracuse in 2023, how can this program, or how does this program define success moving forward?
I think you got to keep the momentum from last season, and that's two things. I mean, first and foremost, it's bowl game. You got to get back to back-to-back years with the bowl game. A lot of they played in the pinstripe last year. They've played in the pinstripe. I think that's the third time they've played in the pinstripe. It's Yankee Stadium in late December. In the Northeast, not exactly a desirable location, but for a school from upstate New York, it kind of is. They've got a lot of alumni in the New York City area, so it's a chance for them to see it. And then ideally, you want to have a winning record. 6-6 will get you to a bowl game, but I think at the very least they want to repeat 7-5. Get to 8-4. Maybe one of those games they first, they're home versus Clemson, at Carolina, maybe they put it all together that game, they steal a win, and maybe 9 and, I don't know. But they definitely have to, kind of match last year, at least in terms of getting to a bowl game, because, with the bowl game, you get those extra practices. And, for a school that depends on developing a lot of their players, they don't recruit, the way schools like Clemson and Florida State do, where you can, you're going to get a lot of kids who are going to start their freshman year. So those extra practices, they really help the whole development process.
Yeah,
I think it's really about those are the two keys for a successful season. You got to keep the momentum going. Winning record and another bowl game is a way to do that.
Yeah, I think winning a bowl game also, I believe also the program benefits from just appearing in one of these sponsored bowl games, and it helps contribute towards the program. So it's another positive that Syracuse can receive if they can win 6 games, which is always important. And it's just being in that preseason, being in that extra spotlight for football. And then I think something that we're going to segue into this final topic for this interview is what's really unique about Syracuse that the other 10 interviews may not have is that the last 6 meetings for Clemson and Syracuse have been, as I would describe them, as wacky. And so you start in 2017 with Kelly Bryant. He ends up, I believe it was concussion. Syracuse upsets Clemson. It's their one loss going into the playoff. And since then, it has been 2018, Trevor Lawrence goes down and Chase Bryce has to beat Syracuse. 2019 and 2020 are the outliers in this, but then 2021, Clemson is barely able to escape out of Syracuse off of a missed field goal. And then we have last year where Cade Klubnik replaces DJ Uyunglele, doesn't do much, but takes care of the football, and Clemson's run game makes the difference against Syracuse. For you, when I lay it all out like that, what has it really been about Syracuse that always seems to give Clemson a little trouble? Or maybe, and when I talk to Clemson fans, especially when it's at Syracuse marked on the calendar, they get a little nervous. They tense up. They're like, oh, at Syracuse. We've seen this story before. What is it about Syracuse, and especially since Babers has been there, that's giving Clemson trouble?
I wish I knew, and, I'll bet Dino wishes he knew if he, I'm sure he'd like to bottle it and, and unleash that in every other game. I'm sure part of it is, for some time now, Clemson is, kind of kicked Florida State, off the perch there of being, the team in the ACC. Dick Vitale likes to say that, Duke gets everyone's best shot in hoops. In ACC play, Clemson gets everyone's best shot. And the kids on Syracuse, they're competitors just like the Clemson kids are, and I'm sure they get up for that game, especially when they did on a Friday night in the Dome. They kind of out of nowhere surprised Clemson. I remember watching that game. It's just kind of like, wow, what is going on here? That's a game you kind of think they're going to get whacked. And I think one thing that does help is this 3-3-5 defense that they play, and it helps against bigger, stronger, faster teams that might have more depth, because the 5 defensive back, it lets them get some of their athletes on the field. I think back to last year, they're really going to miss Jihad Carter. He had an interception in that game, and he ran the fumble back 90 yards for a touchdown. So he was a big reason that they had that 11-point lead. It's they can unleash guys like that, and just kind of let their playmaking ability and natural talent take over. Where they kind of run into trouble is in the trenches. The game, I can't remember his name, Bryce, the quarterback there, when they completed the touchdown pass with like a minute to go or so, the game in Clemson. Syracuse basically had that game won, but Clemson, they ran the ball down their throats on that final drive. And it's just a lot of times they wind up getting overpowered by, teams like Clemson, with the, bigger, stronger defensive lines and offensive lines. That's, the trenches is kind of, what separates, the great teams from the good teams. So I don't know. I mean, it seems like it should be a good game this year. It's in Syracuse. The Dome when the fans are into it, it gets very loud. So Clemson be well served to jump out to a 14-point lead, but who knows?
I think who knows is the statement of the podcast for at least this matchup. Is that I can never tell. It's either going to be in 2019 and 20 where Clemson's able to take care of business, or it's one of your college football classics where it comes down to a final pass, a final rush, a final sack. These games are fun at the end of it. They are very interesting when you look at the calendar.
Yeah. I mean, especially with the Clemson game, I mean, I can honestly say, nothing would surprise me. I mean, yeah. if Clemson, if they stomped on them, Clemson does that to a lot of teams. So that wouldn't surprise me. But just given the way these teams have gone at it the past 6 years, if it winds up being a 28-27 game and someone's got the ball on the 30-yard line with a minute to go, that wouldn't surprise me either.
Yeah. And the final question before we wrap up is every episode that we do in this football preview series is that I think the unique thing is that, I have my perspective on Clemson, and I had talked to people that I work with and students at school. What are their thoughts on Clemson? You normally hear about the same thing every now and then, but in this this continuous series that we've done so far is we get the perspective from you guys. And for you, Clemson's lost 6 games in the last 2 seasons. It hasn't been necessarily, and for my Spotify audience, I'm putting this in quotes, the same Clemson that we've seen from 15 to 20 that won 2 national championships, won 29 straight games. Where, in your mind, is this program headed? They just hired Garrett Riley in January. I say just like they just did it yesterday, but they hired Garrett Riley this offseason in January. They made a splash. Dabo made a big move that not everybody expected him to make necessarily, especially with the in-house promotions that were made the previous offseason with Streeter and Goodwin. Where is this program headed in your eyes, and what do they need to do to get back to that playoff stature?
Well, I mean, I think you touch upon the big thing. They, since Dabo took over, they've really elevated, and, they've just gone from, kind of I don't want to say ACC also ran, but, decent, team to just, the elite who can play with anyone, and they recruit like that, so I think, their defense is going to be, what you would expect from a Clemson defense. You're going to, you score points against Clemson, you're going to earn it. But like you said, the hiring of Garrett Riley, to kind of, reignite an offense here. I mean, they were only, 66th last year in terms of, national passing. They're really unlike them, and but let's see what Cade Klubnik does. And they bring back Will Shipley. You have 15 rushing touchdowns. I mean, the guy's a machine. I think a lot of teams would like to have a player with 3/4 of the talent that Shipley has. So it's really gonna be interesting to see. With Klubnik's, he's gonna have the full season under his belt. How's he playing, in September, and then how's he, looking in November? Is he really gonna, take control of the offense. Is Riley going to help restore the passing game and, kind of bring them back to, a Clemson team that can, hang 45 points without, breaking much of a sweat. So I think, it seems like they've got players on the offensive side of the ball. I just think it's going to be fascinating to see, how does a team of this stature, making that big of a change, how does it play out? From this end, I'm sure they'll be fine. That's, maybe, if they only win 9 games, that might be a, little, bit of a disappointment, but I'm sure Clemson's going to be, the road to the ACC title is going to go through Clemson. And, that's, like it does every year.
Yeah, and we'll see if they can repeat as ACC champions, and kind of that would be, I guess, the first mark of that return from not being in the ACC championship 21. It feels like this is the telling year, is whether these last 2 years are going to be a bug in the system or an actual feature, is what I like to characterize it as.
Yeah, I mean, in as much NFL talent as they produce, I mean, it's hard to recruit at that level where you are constantly, trying to replace NFL talent. I mean, Bama lost twice last year, and people are like, oh, the sky's falling, they missed the playoffs. I mean, looking at college basketball, Kentucky's had kind of a rough few seasons given the way Calipari recruits and the way they put kids in the NBA. So I mean, maybe last year is a bit of an anomaly. I don't think DJ turned out to be what people thought he would at the quarterback position. And quarterback is, especially with the way football is played nowadays, you've got to have an ace at quarterback. I mean, because that's the guy driving the bus. And if you really don't have something special there, you're not going to be able to compete at the level that a team like Clemson's used to competing at. So I kind of I like Klubnik's chances for kind of returning Clemson to that elite status. He looks like he's ready to.
Yeah, and we'll find out starting August 1st, guys. This was Steve Auger of the Juice Online, Syracuse Rivals writer. Steve, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I just want to say thanks for having me. It was a great time. I'd love to do this again during the season if you want. More than welcome to talk some hoops, when basketball season rolls around. So just give me a holler.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you guys liked what Steve had to say, you let me know down in the comments below, or shoot me a personal DM on any of the social medias I have posted below. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in to episode 130 of the Man with the Plan podcast. Next week, we hope to have episode 131 and 132, or parts 5 and 6, featuring Miami and NC State of the Rivals branch. Guys, thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great day and take care.